Hi, everyone. So, in this mini lecture, we will explore several major theoretical perspectives on human development. And each theory offers a different lens for understanding how we grow and change across the lifespan. So, we're going to look at these perspectives together, and we can see how biological, cognitive, social, and environmental factors all interact to shape who we are and how we develop. Over the last 100 years, scientists have discovered a lot about how people grow and change from when they're babies to kids, teenagers, and adults. And so, to explain these changes, they create theories. And so, a theory is like a big idea that helps organize what we already know and gives us a framework for making sense of human development. Theories also point out what we don't know yet and help scientists make predictions. And theories lead to hypotheses, and hypotheses are specific ideas that can be tested with research. So the goal of this testing is not to prove that the theory is perfect, but actually to see if the idea holds up in real time, in practice. If it holds up or if it can be proven wrong. A good theory is a theory that can actually be tested and challenged. And so, as scientists learn more, they often update or adjust their theories, which then leads to new questions and more research. So, we're going to dive into the different theoretical perspectives of human development. And so one is focuses on psychoanalytic theories. And psychoanalytic theories suggest that our development and behavior are shaped by unconscious drives, memories, and conflicts. And Sigmund Freud was the major theorist of psychoanalytic theories. And so the forces are beyond our awareness and control, and they influence us throughout life. And so this is basically what this theory is suggesting, that we develop based on these unconscious drives that we have that are driving our behavior. Freud was the father of the psychoanalytic perspective and developed the psychosexual theory. And this theory proposes that our human development goes through psychosexual stages. And our human behavior is driven by these unconscious impulses, meaning that it's outside of our awareness. We focus on pleasure, on different parts of the body, and this human development is emphasized through early family experiences. So our behavior develops, everything develops based on the relationship that we have with our parents. And so parents tend to play a key role, and they must balance between over gratifying and under gratifying a child's desires to help form a healthy personality. And so, based on this psychosexual theory, this introduced the idea of the unconscious mind, which has influenced psychology and pop culture. It's also one of the first theories to highlight the importance of early family relationships, especially between a parent and a child. This theory does get a lot of criticism, and so the theory mainly emphasizes childhood sexuality, which many find controversial. Concepts like unconscious drives are not falsifiable, and that means they can't be directly tested or observed. And so, for that reason, this theory is not widely accepted. And it's definitely not accepted a lot in modern developmental psychology. Erikson was influenced by Freud's psychosexual theory, but he had placed less emphasis on unconscious motivators. And so he agreed with Freud that human development unfolds in stages, but he focused more on the social and cultural influences rather than unconscious drives. And so he believed that our development goes through psychosocial stages driven by biological maturation, and this applies to all life stages. And he proposed 8 psychosocial stages that span from infancy to late adulthood. And each stage involves a crisis or a conflict. And that is basically a key challenge that must be resolved in order to move forward with development. And these crises shape how we understand ourselves and how we relate to others. Success in one stage helps with success in the next stage. And so, for example, learning to trust others helps a child become more independent. And so, based on the 8 stages, the first stage is during infancy, which happens 0 to 18 months. This is known as the oral stage, where pleasure centers on the mouth. So that's why babies feed. They may suck on something. And there is over or under gratification, which can lead to habits like smoking or nail biting in later adulthood. In terms of the Erikson stage, you have trust versus mistrust. And so, based on the psychosocial stage, infants learn whether they can trust caregivers to meet basic needs. And success leads to a sense of security, while failure leads to fear and mistrust. During toddlerhood, which is about 18 months to 3 years, Freud calls this the anal stage, which focuses on toilet training and control. Strict or lax parenting may lead to issues with orderliness or messiness. In terms of the Erikson stage, this is focused on autonomy versus shame and doubt, where toddlers strive for independence. So they start to walk, feed, and talk, which this supports fosters confidence. And if they don't achieve this stage and they get criticized for walking or feeding, this can lead to shame and doubt. In early childhood, we have the phallic stage, where the focus shifts to genitals. And so children develop desires for opposite sex parents. And resolution involves identifying with same sex parents and adopting societal roles. In the Erikson stage, you have initiative versus guilt. And so children become curious and they take initiative. Encouragement fosters ambition, whereas discouragement leads to guilt. In middle childhood, which is 6 years through puberty, you have the latency stage. And so Freud explains this stage as a period of calm. The child is focused on learning, they make friendships, and they are focused on building their skills. In the Erikson stage, this is known as industry versus inferiority. So in this stage, children are working to master skills and to feel more competent. If they're successful, this builds confidence. If they fail, they can feel inadequate or inferior. During adolescence, Freud talks about the genital stage. This stage is kind of renewed. It focuses on genitals again, except it also emphasizes mature sexual relationships. And so this is where adolescents, they begin to experiment sexually and finding their sexual identity. During Erikson's stage, this is known as identity versus role confusion. And so teens tend to explore their personal identity where they see career interests, they learn their values and what they believe in. And this success in this area tends to lead to a strong sense of self and identity. If teens feel confused about their identity, it can lead to an identity crisis. In the early adulthood stage, Freud's theory doesn't extend beyond adolescence. However, Erikson calls the early adulthood stage intimacy versus isolation. And so young adults, Seek deep relationships during this phase. Success leads to intimacy. However, failure results in loneliness and isolation. You also have middle adulthood, which is known as generativity versus stagnation. And Erikson proposes that in this stage, adults strive to contribute to society. They start to work, they may become parents and raise children, and success can lead to a sense of purpose in their life, whereas failure can lead to stagnation. And then lastly, in late adulthood, Erikson proposes integrity versus despair. And so this is where older adulthood comes into play, and older adults reflect on their life. And if they're satisfied, it can lead to peace. But if it leads to regret, it can leave older adults feeling despair and perhaps fearing death. So now we're going to go over behaviorism and social learning theory. So let's take a step back to the early 20th century. And at that time, psychoanalytic theory was pioneered by Freud and his followers. And he emphasized the role of the unconscious mind, these hidden desires, fears, and conflicts that operate beneath our awareness. And these unconscious forces are powerful, and they shape our development and personality in ways that we can't directly see. But here is the challenge. How do we scientifically study something that is, by definition, unconscious? Many scientists began to grow skeptical, and they argued that if they can't directly observe or measure unconscious thoughts and emotions, how can they verify them objectively? This critique set the stage for a very different perspective, which is known as behaviorism. And behaviorism focuses more on observable, measurable behaviors. Instead of speculating about hidden mental processes, behaviorists believed that they should study what people do, which are their actions, because behavior can be directly observed, recorded, and analyzed. According to behaviorism, all behavior is shaped by the physical and social environment. In other words, who we become is not determined by unconscious pulses, but rather by the way our surroundings influence and condition us. One of the founders of behaviorism was known as John Watson, and he put this idea into striking words in 1925. And he famously declared, "Give me a dozen healthy infants, well-informed, well-formed, and my own specified world to bring them up in, and I'll guarantee to take any one at random and train him to become any type of specialist I might select." And so Watson believed that given complete control over a child's environment, he could shape that child into any kind of adult. For Watson, human destiny was not determined by genetics and not by unconscious drives, but by learning experiences and environmental influences. Classical conditioning is learning through association. In other words, classical conditioning is a kind of learning where a person or animal learns to connect one thing in the environment with another response in the body. This idea was developed by Ivan Pavlov, who was a Russian scientist, and he noticed that dogs naturally salivate when they taste food. And so the dogs started to salivate when they heard sounds or saw things connected to food, like their food bowl clattering or their owner opening the cupboard. And so Pavlov tested this theory of classical conditioning, and he played a tone right before giving dogs food. And after repeating this many times, the dogs began to salivate just from hearing the tone, even when no food was given. And so overall classical conditioning is proposing that a neutral stimulus elicits a response originally caused by another stimulus. And the neutral stimulus is the tone, so it doesn't cause salivation. Food naturally causes the salivation, and food is the unconditioned response. After pairing the tone with the food, the tone alone starts to cause salivation, and this becomes the conditioned response. We tend to see classical conditioning in humans too. And so, for example, newborn infants can be conditioned if stroking a baby's forehead is paired with giving them sugar water, which makes them suck naturally. Soon, the stroking alone will make them suck. Fears and emotions often come from conditioning. So, for example, a child might fear the doctor's office because they associate it with the pain of a vaccination. And so the key point of classical conditioning is that it only explains automatic bodily and emotional responses. So like salivating, sucking, or feeling fear. But there is another type of behaviorist learning which we'll cover, and it's known as operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is a behavior that's shaped by consequences. So it's when a behavior is followed by something pleasant, we are more likely to do it again. And if a behavior is followed by something unpleasant, we are less likely to do it again. So it is a type of learning where our behavior is shaped by consequences. It was developed by B.F. Skinner, and he proposed that reinforcement and punishment influence our behavior. Operant conditioning helps explain how we learn skills, habits, and everyday behaviors. Our parents, our teachers, and even workplaces use reinforcement and punishment to shape our behavior. So an example would be a teenager coming home after their curfew and they get scolded. And so they're less likely to break curfew the next time. If a child sets a dinner table and gets praised, then they're more likely to set the table again. And so these operant conditioning tactics are what help explain how we learn over time and how we learn through our experiences. Critics do point out that it overemphasizes external events and ignores internal processes like our thoughts and emotions. And so it leaves out the fact that people don't just respond to their environment, but they can also reflect, problem solve, and change behavior on their own. Social learning theory was developed by Albert Bandura. And Albert Bandura proposed that behavior is influenced by our thoughts, emotions, and environment. And so Bandura agreed that the environment is important, but he also added a new layer, which are thoughts and emotions, and they matter too. According to social learning theory, people actively process information, and what they feel and think influences their behavior. And so the environment still matters, but it's mostly because of how it shapes our thinking and emotions. And so an example would be a teenager comes home late, and instead of just being punished, he sees his parents upset, he feels remorse, and that emotion makes him less likely to come home late again. This theory is also based on observational learning. So one of Bandura's most important ideas is learning by watching others. And so our behavior is also shaped by what we see around us and how other people are behaving. So, for example, children that see violence and get rewarded may project that behavior to someone else. And so that someone else sees it and they may copy that aggressive behavior. However, if a child sees another child punished and scolded, that child might be less likely to imitate that behavior that got them punished. And so the key point here is that we don't always need to be directly punished or rewarded in order to learn. By watching others, we can understand the potential consequences and change our own behavior. So we're briefly going to cover some cognitive theories of human development. And cognition is key to understanding development. Cognitive theories emphasize the importance of thought processes in understanding human development throughout life. So in this section, we'll explore key concepts from two influential perspectives, which is the cognitive developmental theory and the information processing theory. So Piaget was a Swiss scholar, and he was one of the first to systematically study how infants and children think and reason. He argued that understanding children's thoughts is essential because cognition shapes our behavior. And according to his theory, both children and adults actively engage with their environment. And this is driven by a natural curiosity to learn. As they interact with the world, they form and refine cognitive schemas, which are these mental frameworks that consist of concepts, ideas, and strategies for understanding and responding to their surroundings. And these ongoing interactions are what help individuals build and evolve their cognitive structures. And so this plays a central role in human intellectual development. According to Piaget's stages of cognitive development, there are 4 stages. And the first one is the sensory motor stage, and this occurs between birth to 2 years of age. This is where infants learn through senses and motor action. So they learn by watching, seeing, hearing, touching, and tasting. And they get a sense of the world around them. And so this is where they learn to communicate. They learn objects. They learn how to communicate with the world. Pre-operational stage occurs between 2 to 6 years of age. This is where children learn to use language to communicate. So they learn to communicate their emotions and thoughts to others. They also learn symbolic thinking, but their reasoning does include logical errors. So for example, think about the conservation of liquid. A child might think a taller, thinner glass has more juice, even though the amount is the same. And so if they're given an experiment where a person is pouring a glass of water from going from a thinner glass to a fatter glass, they might think that there's more water in the fatter glass. So therefore, centration is common among children this age, where they're focusing on one aspect of a situation but not the other, and they're not able to concentrate on 2 different situations at once. Then we have the concrete operational stage. This occurs from ages 7 to 11 years. And this is where children do start to think logically about concrete events. So they understand conservation, they understand reversibility, and children in this stage are able to solve basic math problems. So they can solve 5 plus 3 equals 8, or 8 minus 3 equals 5. However, they do struggle with abstract ideas. So they can't think more abstractly during this stage. This is where the formal operation stage comes in, and this starts at ages 12 and goes through adulthood. And this is where adolescents and adults can reason abstractly and hypothetically. They're able to plan for the future. They can reason about different possibilities and multiple variables. And so they're able to do certain projects. So an example would be a team planning an experiment that's testing soil types on plant growth. And they are able to control variables and predict outcomes. And so this is like the overall brief overview of cognitive developmental stages that Piaget proposed. So now we're going to cover briefly the information processing theory. So according to this theory, our mind works like a computer, and humans are born with the ability to process information. Development is continuous, not staged. So changes happen gradually as we become more efficient and faster at thinking. Our brain and nervous system help improve these abilities during childhood. When we start to age, it can slow them down as we start to age. Experience and social interaction can help us learn new ways to manage and manipulate information. So this theory gives a detailed view of our thinking process, and it allows scientists to make specific predictions about our behavior that can be tested in research. So at the same time that Piaget was writing, Russian scholar Vygotsky offered a different view of cognitive development. And he emphasized culture. And culture includes the beliefs, values, customs, and skills of a group, and it is shaped by people interacting in everyday life. And so he theorized that culture transmitted through social interaction. Vygotsky's sociocultural theory focuses on how culture is passed down from one generation to the next through social interactions. Children learn about their culture by interacting with adults and more experienced peers through talking, playing, and working together. These social experiences help children learn the ways of thinking and behaving that are valued in their society. And over time, children can apply these skills on their own, and they need less help from others. So like Piaget, Vygotsky believed that children actively participate in their own development. But unlike Piaget, he emphasized that learning is social. And children learn best through interactions with adults, peers, and their cultural environment. So similar to Vygotsky, Bronfenbrenner believed, so this is giving you a diagram of Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory. And it's showing you how we develop through these interactions of systems. And so there are various systems that are interacting with each other to contribute to our development. And so at the very center of the model is the individual. And this is what's known as ontogenetic development. And it refers to the changes that happen within a person over time. And these changes include biological, cognitive, and socio-emotional traits. So our genetics, personality, emotions, and thinking abilities are interacting and shaping one another. And so, for example, brain development can improve reasoning skills and perspective taking, which may help children form closer relationships. And so at the center, you see the individual, and then you see we have the microsystem. And so the microsystem is the most immediate context. So it's made up of the people and settings that the individual is directly interacting with. An example is friends, family, school, and work. So because the individual is actively part of these environments, the microsystem has a direct impact on development. So an example would be supportive peer relationships. They can strengthen self-esteem and emotional growth. The next system is called the mesosystem. And so microsystems are connecting with each other to form the mesosystem. An example is experiences at home are influencing what happens at school. So a parent who encourages reading at home helps shape a child's classroom learning. Since the individual participates in both settings, the mesosystem also has a direct effect on development. The next one is called the exosystem, and this includes settings the individual does not directly participate in, but that still affect them. So the child is not part of their parents' workplace, but a stressful job may affect the parent's mood. And then that mood can then influence the child. So another example would be school funding decisions. They can affect the resources that children have access to in the classroom. The next one is the macro system, and this is the larger cultural and societal context that surrounds the other systems. So this includes cultural values, laws, politics, and traditions. And these broad influences trickle down to affect the other systems. So an example is cultural beliefs. Let's say there are cultural beliefs about education. That can shape funding priorities, which can then influence schools. And then finally, you have the chronos system, and this adds the element of time. People and their environments change over time, and these shifts affect development. So an example would be historical events like wars, epidemics, or policy changes. These can influence every level of the system. On a personal level, we have life transitions such as graduating or getting married. And these can change over time. They can change the roles that people play and the context that they become a part of. And so together, these systems show that development is this constant dynamic interaction between individuals and their environments. And they are always changing as people and their contexts evolve. So the last two that I'll cover are the dynamic systems theory and the evolutionary developmental theory. So the dynamic systems theory is proposing that development is a result of an integrated system. So this was founded by Esther Thelen. And of course, each child has unique traits, circumstances, and interactions that are shaping how they develop. And this is leading to individual pathways of growth and development. But development is also integrated with other things. So it's an integrated system that combines children's biology, their genetics, their skills, and their environments. And the system is constantly changing. And through these changes, new abilities are emerging. And so an example is when a baby starts walking for the very first time or speaking a first word. They may seem like isolated achievements, but they're actually building systematically on earlier skills. So an example would be pulling up to stand. Pulling up to stand prepares infants to take their first steps. And early babbling lays the foundation for speech. And these very simple skills are combining to form more complex ones. And they are enabling babies to interact with the world in a more sophisticated way. So an infant that learns to sit upright or coordinate vision with movement can then combine those skills to successfully pick up a desired object. Development is also goal-directed. So infants and children act out of a desire to achieve something, such as getting a toy or expressing themselves. So their abilities, along with the environmental support and limitations, are shaping how and whether these goals can be reached. The ethology studies the evolutionary basis of behavior, and Darwin's theory of evolution explained that traits aiding survival and reproduction are then passed on to future generations. A couple of theorists, so Lawrence and Tinbergen, showed that animal behaviors like imprinting in geese are inborn and then support survival. Bowlby argued that human infants also display built-in behaviors. These would be crying, smiling, and grasping. And they are behaviors that bring caregivers close and ensure safety and bonding. And so evolutionary development theory explains how genes and environments are constantly interacting with each other. Genes provide the predispositions, but environmental factors determine how genes are expressed. So overall development is never like a nature versus nurture debate, but it's rather the interaction of both. Nature is interacting with nurture, and in fact, nature sets the predispositional stage, and then nurture comes into play, and any environments that are in favor of that genetic expression then produce the behavior. And so overall, it's a theory that supports both, in that our biology is interacting with emotional, socio-economical changes that are then producing new abilities and therefore contributing to development.